Okay, in this screencast, I'm going to talk about photosynthesis. This is actually going to be the first screencast, and then the second one we'll get into the kind of details of photosynthesis. But anyway, what is photosynthesis? Well, here's some examples of photosynthesis, and if you said it's how plants get food, you'd be partially right, because it's how any producer, or sometimes we call them autotrophs. Auto means self, troph means food. Things that can make their own food. So yeah, we've got ferns here. They can photosynthesize, but this is actually kind of brown algae called kelp. Kelp is also a photosynthetic organism, a producer. Here we have a protist, a single-celled organism. It can actually eat things. It can be heterotrophic like an animal, and it can also, if there's sunlight around, it can be photosynthetic and it can make its own food. This is actually photosynthetic bacteria. So bacteria, also forms of it are photosynthetic, and this is also photosynthetic bacteria. So it's not just plants. Many organisms in the biosphere are photosynthetic, but the key thing is they're using sunlight to make their own food. So let's look at the main molecule involved in that. So if we look at this molecule, this is the main energy trapping molecule. And now you're thinking, wait, that's the chloroplast? No, it's the molecule in the chloroplast. It's called chlorophyll. So chlorophyll is the molecule that the chloroplast has in it that captures sun energy and allows it to make food. In terms of light, there's a lot of radiation that's coming down to Earth from the sun, right? There's gamma rays, there's X-rays, there's UV rays, that's what's burning your skin. There's infrared, that's what makes you feel warm when sunlight hits you. There's microwaves, they are what we use, they cause water to polarize and rub against each other and make heat when they hit water. And there's radio waves, which is what your cell phone uses, or television waves, or what we listen to the radio in our car in. Those are weak but longer wavelengths. But in here, this very narrow spectrum is called visible light. And it turns out most of the sunlight hitting Earth is in this visible spectrum. That's really important so that we can see each other. And it's also really important because that's the primary wavelengths of light that plants use. And they use primarily over here in the blue and violet range, and they use over here in the red and orange range. So if we look at why that occurs, well, again, chloroplasts are green because this molecule chlorophyll is green, and any pigment that's green, what happens to the green light that hits it? Well, the green light is reflected. All the other forms of light are going to be absorbed by it. So it's important when we talk about light and why plants are green. Well, they're green not because they're absorbing green light, they're green because that's what's being reflected. And if we look up here in this chart, this is showing that within plants there's actually several pigments. We're going to do a chromatography lab where we actually extract and separate these pigments and actually look at the different pigments. There's two green ones called chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B, and if you look at them you can see they're absorbing primarily in the blue and purple range, but then also in the red and orange range. The one area they're not really absorbing is the green. So that is why, again, plants seem green. The green light is being reflected. But there is another pigment in there they're called carotenoids. These are sort of the orange and reddish pigments. We see these in the fall when chlorophyll is not produced anymore in deciduous trees, and the trees get that bright red and orange color. If you look, they absorb primarily in the blue range, and then they don't absorb at all in the red or orange range. So that color is reflected back. And these different pigments allow plants to absorb different wavelengths of visible light and to increase the efficiency with which that visible light can be absorbed. So the more different colored pigments we have in a plant, the more of the sunlight can be absorbed. And we'll look at some of those pigments when we do chromatography this week in class. Okay, and the action spectrum, this is basically just shows where if we add up all of the absorption areas here and here, we can see that mostly it's the blue and violet light and then the orange and red light that plants use, and not so much the green. So green would not be a good color to grow plants under because all that light would just be reflected back. So where does photosynthesis occur? Well, obviously the main organ in a plant would be the leaf, right? Leaves are the photosynthetic organs that have most of the chlorophyll in them. But then if we go into the leaf, there's On the outside, there's a waxy layer which kind of waterproofs it and prevents water loss. And then there's little holes called stomata. Stomata let carbon dioxide in, oxygen out. But then the middle area in here is called the mesophyll. Meso means middle, so this is sort of the middle area, and this has a lot of photosynthetic cells in them. So if we zoom in on a mesophyll cell, we can see it's got all these little green granules in it. Those are chloroplasts, right? We already talked about chloroplasts within plant cells, right? And then within the chloroplast, if we zoom in on a chloroplast, we can see that they have these little green, they look like little green pancakes. They're called thylakoid membranes, and they're stacked in little green stacks called grana. So that's where photosynthetic that's where the light reaction occurs, where light is absorbed within the plants. So this is kind of a breakdown of where we are going to have photosynthesis occur. And then in the next video, we'll talk about the steps of photosynthesis. But the overview, this is really important. You really need to know what's going on here. We're taking carbon dioxide and water, combining them to make sugar, glucose, and then the waste product is oxygen. And don't worry about balancing the 6, 6, and 6. We won't have to do that in class. But we're going to break down what happens, the 2 steps of photosynthesis. We have the light reaction and the Calvin cycle, and we'll discuss those in the next video.